Shalom. Welcome to the Messianic Hour with Rabbi Scott Sekulow. The Messianic Hour is a program designed to give you insight into the Jewish roots of your faith. Rabbi Scott is also here to answer your questions and help you gain a deeper understanding of Bible prophecy. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Scott Sekulow.
Shalom and welcome to another edition of the Messianic Hour. I'm your host, Rabbi Scott. This show is dedicated to reaching the lost and educating the found. I'm here with my wife, Judy, as we bring you an interesting perspective on the Scripture from a Jewish and Gentile point of view as we've come together in our Messiah. And we have a great show in store for you. We're going to be talking about Acts chapter 18, and we're also going to be looking on what's going on in Israel. But I want to encourage you to visit our website, rabbiscott.com. Not only can you go to watch previous episodes, you can actually listen and watch as we record all of our shows. I also want to encourage you to go to our YouTube page, The Messianic Hour, all one word, and start watching those videos. We're trying to get our numbers increased so we can get all of it into one show, but we have to get our viewership up. So we encourage you to link and tell your friends, put it on Facebook and tweet about it, but let your friends know about the show and encourage them to watch it while you're on your computer. You can go click on it and watch the show and learn a little more and see Judy's smiling face as we share about the Scripture, Judy.
Yes, we are. We're actually going to be doing Acts 18. We'll see how far we get through it, and then we're going to be talking about Purim because Purim is coming up in about a month. So we want to go in and tell you about it so you have time to prepare if you would like to celebrate this holiday.
That's right. And Purim, we know, deals with the modern day, what would be now modern day Iran, trying to annihilate the Jews. 2,000 years later, guess what? Not much has changed. Matter of fact, there's a lot of speculation going on right now, Judy. We're hearing a lot in the news. Is Israel going to attack Iran? Is Syria going to attack Israel? Israel is on high alert for its embassies, and security has been increased. With the last week, we've seen several attempted terrorist attacks, all being linked back to Iran. Our president's also been putting, and the European nations have been putting pressure on Iran as well. Are we on the verge of war? A lot of people are speculating this could do a lot of interesting things. One of the reasons why I think we won't go to war, at least why the United States will try not to, is if we go to war, it's a good chance that Iran will try to cut off the oil supply by blocking off the strait of there and not allow other companies other ships to go by, thus putting us into an economic hardship. There's a lot of things going on. It's not just let's go to war. It's a lot of politics involved. But I also think that Israel is getting to that point, too, that they realize Iran is trying to be nuclear. If Iran goes nuclear, Saudi Arabia has already said they will now go nuclear. This is something that our president really needs to watch, and the UN, to realize the importance of not letting this happen. These countries are very volatile and can fall into anyone's hands at any time. We do not want these kind of weapons in the hands of terrorists. That's why what Israel is doing is very important. We need to stand with Israel. We need to pray for Israel as well. So I want to encourage you, again, go to our website, rabbiscott.com. While you're there, you can check out all of our links to different information. You can learn about the Feast of Purim. We have a link there as well. Sign up for our newsletter, get a free book. I Have a Friend Who's Jewish to You, and the prophecy card. 70 key prophecies, where they're found in the Torah, where they're fulfilled in the Brit Hadashah, and how to witness to your Jewish friends. It's all free just for signing up at rabbiscott.com. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to the Messianic Hour. I'm Judy Sekulow, and I'm glad that you're with us today as we start on Acts chapter 18, seeing that Rabbi Shaul has finally made his way to the city of Corinth. So, Rabbi, why don't you tell us about this?
I will. By the way, I want to say that the music you heard coming in out of Zion is by Sharon Sharon Wilbur, the daughter-in-law of Paul Wilbur. She has a great album called Mercy Calling. You can go to our website and get that if you like the bumper music. But Judy, we're talking about now Acts chapter 18, and this is kind of one of those chapters. It's kind of I call it a filler chapter. It kind of just tells us a little bit about what's going on, but it actually encompasses a year and a half worth of events that take place during this time. And we see here that Paul is now going to another Greek city, and he's met up with some people who are in the same trade that he originally had. It's called a tent maker. Now, people have, I think, an understanding of, thinking, oh, he made tents. In reality, the Greek term used for that really was anyone who worked with leather. So he was really a person who worked with the leather, and he could have done all different types of things, not just tent making, but it could have been clothing and things as such.
And what's interesting is that he set up a trade, he set up a shop, and he was trying to be self-sufficient so that he was self-supporting himself and not relying on the congregations to support him.
Right. Matter of fact, that is a teaching that comes out of the rabbis. Matter of fact, Rabbi Zadok said, do not use the Torah as a shovel to dig with. In addition, Hillel would often say, he who makes a profit from the crown of Torah will waste away. And that's Previot 4:7. So we see here the rabbi's understanding of that you should not try to go in and just go to teach and try to make money on that. Doesn't mean in our modern society, when people go and share, that many times are raising money for their ministry, not for the work they're doing. Many of them have evangelists have second jobs so that will be taken care of.
And as a tent maker, we see that he has found some Jewish people who are also believers, and this is Aquila and Priscilla, and they were probably among the Roman Jews that were exiled under Claudius's decree that we talked about in Acts 16. So we see that here that Rabbi Shaul would spend his weekdays in the marketplace doing his trade, and then he spent his Shabbats in the Corinthian synagogue declaring Messiah from the scriptures. And in fact, it's really interesting that archaeology has discovered a piece of an inscription from a door in Corinth that read Synagogue of the Hebrews.
Now, Judy, that's an interesting point. It's called Synagogue of the Hebrews. Why is it aren't all synagogues of the Hebrews? Isn't that a Jewish term? But here, as we're going to be learning, that word's going to be played a different understanding. I'm going to leave it as a teaser until later on, though.
Well, we see that before we get into that aspect that you just teased them with, that Silas and Timothy have joined up with Rabbi Shaul again and brought him a gift of money from these other congregations through Thessalonica. And with this, it kind of enabled Rabbi Shaul to concentrate his efforts now more in the synagogue. He didn't have to work all the time. He was able to really preach and start to mentor these new believers.
That's right. And Judy, while he's preaching, though, something happens along the way. He gets a little irritated with the congregation there, to the point where it says he gets up and leaves and dusts his feet off and says, I'm out of here. But someone went with him. Tell us who went with him.
Well, it was actually the leader of the synagogue. He was probably the administrator of the synagogue. He could have even been the head cantor. But through Paul's discussions and his sermons and his teachings, he came to believe. So when Rabbi Shaul marched out of the synagogue and basically went next door to the house of a God-fearing Gentile named Titus, that to the surprise of the congregation, the Crispus, the head of the synagogue, and his entire
would be the president of the synagogue today.
His entire family went with him.
You can imagine the shock on their face as they see. Here we see, very prominent. That position is a position of prominence. It's of importance. Even today in traditional synagogues, the president of the synagogue is held in very high esteem and high authority. For that person to leave, realize that they understood that he was proclaiming himself as a follower of Messiah.
And it's really interesting that, with this, people who were coming to the synagogue really didn't have to change their route. They just went to the house next door. And we see that it really flourished. And it says in the scriptures, and many of the Corinthians who heard him, Rabbi Shaul, believed and were baptized. So probably as a reaction to the number of the Gentiles coming in, is the reason why we see this inscription.
That's right. We see here another Bet Midrash, another congregation open up right next door. As you said, it was right within the same walking distance on Shabbat. Now, that's one thing we need to notice here, too. These are all believers. They're not worshiping on Sunday, are they? They're worshiping on Shabbat. This is Paul's ministry. He's in it. They've been believers now for a number of years, and we still see them going on Shabbat. This kind of messes with some people because they think, oh, they immediately started Sunday worship. No, that didn't happen for hundreds of years later. We see them going on Shabbat and worshiping together. And so what that insignia was insinuating, this is the synagogue of the Hebrews. The one next door would say synagogue of the Messianics, or the followers of Messiah.
And we know, based on his previous experiences, Rabbi Shaul was going to really expect the persecution to start happening. It followed him all where he went, and he was beginning to make plans to leave the city. But I think it's really interesting that this time the Lord spoke to him and said, "Do not be afraid, keep on speaking, do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city." So as you said, as a result, Rabbi Shaul stayed in Corinth, teaching out of the house of Titus for a year and a half. He was able to get a lot of work done. And during that time is when we see that he actually composed the 2 epistles to the Thessalonians.
That's right. So we see this long period of time where he's in one place and he's sharing with them. You can imagine the knowledge that this group received. Saul being one of the great rabbis of all times, with his knowledge and understanding, this was a very strong group as well. And
it's interesting that, when Christus, the head of the synagogue, left, another man came and replaced him. And again, he's very anti-Rabbi Shaul, anti-Gentile coming in. Again, it's that pride, that being threatened. So they wanted to take Rabbi Shaul up to the proconsul, and have him tried for basically teaching anti-Torah.
Right.
And they were saying, this man is persuading people to worship gods in ways contrary to the Torah.
Right. So here's a threat that he's trying to do this. And what's interesting, Judy, is the response from the quote judge is, wait, this has nothing to do with us. This is your own religion. This is your own thing. While you're trying to separate the Messianic Jews from the Jewish community, we don't see a difference. You guys are having, this is an internal debate about your script. What happens right afterwards is basically the bailiff then takes the gentleman who's with the traditional congregation and is beaten for bringing him in front of it. So he really, the tide was turned there, and as we see, Shaul was being protected as God said he would be.
And why don't you tell us about this haircut for Rabbi Shaul and the implications of, was this a Nazirite vow? What did this mean? Why would they mention this haircut?
Well, it mentions that he gets a haircut, which we have to assume, looking at the scripture, it's a Nazirite vow. But we assume that the Nazirite vow, the haircut is cut at the end. But how do you determine how long a person's been taking the Nazirite vow? By the length of their hair. So how does this start? You got to cut it off first. So they start with a bald head and they end with a bald head. What happens at the end of the vow, they'll then take that hair and it's brought to the temple and it's burnt along with the burnt offerings as part of that. But you have this whole theory of, was he beginning one? Was he ending one? And if he's outside Jerusalem, how do you end it? Because you have to go to the temple. So most people believe that he was starting his vow, not necessarily ending it.
And just so people understand this Nazirite vow, you can go to Numbers chapter 6, and that talks about what a Nazirite vow is and the requirements of it.
And what we see again happening in the book of Acts, later on, we're going to say, I think it's in chapter 21, when he goes to Jerusalem, again he takes the Nazirite vow, and all these, by the way, require sacrifices. You have to make sacrifices. So the believers were still making sacrifices at the temple. So we see them continuing to follow along in their ways. And Judy, doesn't look like we'll be able to quite finish this one up, although we pretty much got it all the way through, I think.
I think we're pretty close.
We're pretty done there. So next week we'll be looking at Acts chapter 19. But when we come back, we'll be looking at the Feast of Purim. This is the Messianic Hour. Visit our website at rabbiscott.com. We'll be back right after this.